I witnessed an interview that will never be outdone in how appalling it was conducted. James Clayton, who's BBC's North America tech reporter, was busted by Elon Musk as lying to his face about hate speech, so-called hate speech on Twitter. But you've got to watch this whole interview, because the BBC North America tech reporter, who is sat in front of a man who is pioneering space exploration, intending to get the human race to be an interplanetary race and get us to Mars, who has side hustles in revolutionizing the motor industry, who is also only 2 weeks ago signed a petition stating that we need to put a moratorium on AI work because it might bring doom to mankind. And the BBC North America tech reporter, James Clayton, ran out of questions. He literally couldn't think of what to ask Elon Musk, who not only, on top of everything else, is the richest man ever to have lived and probably the most interesting man alive today. It was astonishing to watch. But the lunacy continued. The BBC US disinformation reporter, a reporter called Mike Wendling, wrote an article essentially in defense of James Clayton. And in that article, himself, the US disinformation reporter, reveals his bias and borderline disinformation, though I hate that odious word, but including that Musk wasn't accurate to say the BBC showed COVID bias. Well, not only do we know that not to be true, Twitter had to fact check the BBC during the pandemic over its covering of mental health impact. There's actually a journalist at The Spectator. There's a pseudonymous writer called Charlie Walsham, who actually works at the BBC, and he's written a couple of pieces for The Spectator describing what goes on in the BBC. And he's written, not only, if you remember the Great Barrington Declaration, he describes the scorn that the BBC editors had when that came up, and they saw it as problematic. Well, now it turned out it's pretty much pathetic.
Totally. And actually, Winston, I just want to play that particular clip from the interview, because I think it's really worth watching, actually, to see what you're referring to. So this is the moment when Clayton, representing the BBC, was completely owned by Musk over COVID misinformation.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, and then it disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, so. You thought it wasn't?
You thought it wasn't. But Winston, what I found so fascinating, right, is that the moment Musk asks him a question which challenges the BBC groupthink, this bloke, Clayton, he's got no idea. That they literally live in their own bubble, don't they?
It's a classic example of when the groupthink meets reality. They live in another world. I mean, I've already listed some things he didn't report on. They didn't even mention the Twitter files. It's another thing that the BBC, generally speaking, have barely touched. This is a story where they've uncovered government and big tech collusion to suppress the First Amendment, free speech in America, the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And he didn't even think to ask him that.
Not one word.
Not one. And thankfully, Elon Musk had the good humor and foresight to broadcast the interview live on Twitter Spaces so that we could see it. And now we also know the BBC edited the interview, obviously, to try and make themselves look a little bit better.